Awake my heart, faith returning. And Abram went up out of Egypt into the place of the altar, which he had made at the first. Genesis 13:1-4. As we noted in our yesterday's reflection, when Abram stepped aside from the faith principle, taking things into his own hands, and going down into Egypt because of famine in Canaan, he not only acted without divine guidance, but pushed himself into a most disturbing situation. Through his equivocations, Sarai, his beautiful wife, the mother-to-be of the promised Messianic seed, found herself in the harem of an Egyptian king. In some way or other, however widely the circumstances may vary, that is always the kind of result when we slip away from the faith life and lapse into self-managing again. For the moment we seem so busy and sensible and practical again, and this getting on with things seems so much more expeditious than waiting in prayer, that we enjoy an exhilarating self-assurance. Then we find ourselves involved and complicated. Something has gone wrong somewhere. Why have we lost the sense of God's presence? Why does He not intervene? How can we undo things or get out of the tangle? Yes, that is always what happens when we take things into our own hands. We cannot run the spiritual life by the wisdom of the flesh. The attempt to do so always ends in failure. And we find ourselves sighing, God is not real to me. It is not that God has failed us, but that we ourselves have violated our fellowship with Him by the intrusion of self-will, or have wandered aside by neglectful disregard of prayer. If we are true Christian believers, we are called to a life of faith, and the faith principle is meant to cover courtship, wedlock, married life, career, finance, Christian service, indeed everything. It never impoverishes our life. It enriches and transforms it. But now, watching Abram again, let us see faith returning. And Abram went up out of Egypt unto the place of the altar which he had made there in Canaan at the first. 13:1-4. Thank God, if the man of faith can lapse, he can also recover. Though he trip and stumble, he may steady himself and become the more firm-footed. Blessed are we, if having turned aside from the straight and narrow pathway of faith and obedience, we get back to our first altar, as Abram did. It was a disillusioned and repentant, yet wiser Abram who now bowed again at the first altar. With a sense of failure and emphasized need, but with new dedication and assurance, he called on the name of Jehovah. By special bond, Jehovah was his God, and would restore him. God did restore him, and He will restore you and me. If we have been sidetracked, but are back at the first altar again, in a war, there may be several incidental defeats or reverse without the loss of the whole campaign. Sometimes the severely repulsed have recovered and finally triumphed. It can be true of ourselves. Back to the first altar, to the place of new dedication and renewal. The minute God sees us getting back there again, He is there to meet us. He is not there with glowering face of rebuke. No, He says, I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely. Hosea 14:4. Thus we may turn relapse into recovery and new victory.